Welcome everyone to the teen Vivienne dress, not just for teens but also for us ladies, because we love a good dress. And here I've made a sort of very glamorous cocktail party dress which would be great for any party really. And I'm teaching you quite a lot of couture techniques in this dress, but you can also make this dress in cotton. That will be absolutely fine, and then you can just skip a few of those couture-ish steps. We've got a tie in the front which is in pure silk. We've got fantastic cap sleeves which are inserted into the shoulder, which is also really nice. We've got a beautiful concealed zip in the back and quite a few other techniques. So let's get started. How do I make this beautiful cocktail dress? First of all, you need to collect your pattern pieces. So you need the front piece, we're cutting it back to the bigger scoop. And we also need the side piece and we're cutting it back. So we have the sleeveless version, which is the dotted line. On the center back, we also cut away for the bigger scoop. And on the side, we also take back the solid line so that we have got the sleeveless version, and we need, of course, the cap sleeve. And then for the sizing of the bust, you can see all the sizes on there. This is the size 18 here. And you just cut away the corresponding line, that is your bust line. If you have to make your bust bigger, like I had to for my beautiful model Ivana, then there's a separate video showing you how you very easily, without any knowledge of this, can alter your bust line for your size. I'm making the flat-waisted circle skirt, so where it says regular length skirt cutting line, you want to cut that off. So you've got your skirt pattern ready, and we want to cut the skirt out first. So let's have a look how we do it. You want to fold over the complete length of the fabric, and this is my lining, so that we have got the selvages on top of each other, and then we fold it over again, and that way we can cut a whole circle at the same time. And because of that, we don't need seam allowances apart from where we're going to have the center back. So you want to just put that circle in like a quarter over, but no seam allowance on the other side. And then when you cut this out, you've got a beautiful complete circle. Next, we're going to cut the covering fabric, which is a mesh or lame. This is a 100% man-made fiber. So we want to omit the seam allowance for the center front, but where we do the back pieces, of course, we have all the seam allowances in. Now we want to put together our little lame skirt. Before we do anything else, 1 centimeter seam allowance. No need to pin this really, because the pins just fall out of this kind of stuff. So just go to your sewing machine and then ease the fabric in and hold the back while you're doing it so that it's not pushing or anything. Next, we're going to iron this, and because it's 100% man-made, we need to put an ironing cloth over it. I'm not doing just like lower temperature. Put your lining circle on the floor with the shiny side down, and you put the lame over the top with the right side, shiny side, facing onto the matte side of your lining. And then we're pinning this all the way around. And then where we have got a straight grain on the lining, we are cutting it open. So that's going to be our center back. And then we're going to sew all the way around the circle. And don't forget to take your pins out. It was like really tough because you just didn't see them. So I kept getting stuck quite a few times actually. And it takes a while because it's a big skirt. So all the way around. And then you can cut back your seam allowances, again all the way around, which takes some time. And next we're going to understitch this so that it can't roll out. So pull it apart like this. The seam allowance needs to be sewn to the lining. So you really pull your fabric apart, and then a couple of millimeters next to the seam, you just stitch it through all the way. If you don't pull it apart, it will not be any good at all. So we have now a beautiful line here, which will guarantee that it's not going to roll. Now I'm ironing this again, and can't say this often enough, you need a lot of heat even when you're working with polyester, but you must put a cloth over the top, which is a natural fibre, so it doesn't burn. Next, we're going to make sure that none of the skirt droops in places. So what you do is, because the lame really hasn't got any grain and it'll droop evenly or not droop at all, I'm pulling my satin, which is underneath it, in places, and especially where it's like cross grain and not straight, it will really pull and sag. So pull it out as much as it wants to come out and pin that down. That's a good way of doing it when you actually couldn't ever let this hang out. That wouldn't work on a dress like that. So on other dresses I have done it with hanging out, like for example on the beautiful 50s style dress, if you watch that. This is just another method. You always have to find another way around the problem if you have a different fabric. So I'm sewing this all in all the way around, and then I'm just cutting it back. Don't worry about it making the circle bigger, it still will fit on. And if you have to ease it in a little bit, then that's what you do. We're also overlocking the center back at this point, and then we're cutting out the center front, and we need that twice because we're doing mounting and lining, and we're doing that for all the other pieces as well. Then I'm going to do my cap sleeve. Now move it down because there's no seam allowance, and I'm taking it straight across where I have a beautiful scallop, and I cut out my first sleeve, and then I put it onto another edge of scallop with a, in this case it's actually the wrong side spacing, sorry, and we cut it out so I have a pair. And I've marked the front with a bit of white paper here because you can't snip it. So once I've done the sleeves, I can put them aside for a minute and move on to cutting out all the rest of the mesh lame stuff, and I need it on the full at the front and then everything else twice. I'm also cutting my tie, and I'm making that 7 inches wide, and it's the full width of the fabric, whatever silk you've got. This is like a nice Dupion silk, 110 centimeters wide, so I've got 2 ties of that length, and I've got a bit of a rest for something else. Now the front here in the lining, we've cut it twice because one is going to be a mount. So shiny side up, you will put your mesh or lace or whatever you're using, that's see-through, over the top. If you're making it in cotton, you obviously don't need a second layer to do this. You just work with the lining and the outer fabric. So I'm putting some strategic pins as well to hold it in place. Do not sew all the way around, it will make it just harder later because it tends to push. So now I'm putting it underneath the back as well. Strategic pins again. Now we're going to put the side panels into the center back, and we're also going to sew our tie together. So the tie itself, I just cut myself a tip that I thought looked good, and then I transfer that to the other side just by placing it over the top. I'm basically drawing it, cutting it back, and then I have got my 2 ties. So they need to be done before I can do the front part. When you're putting the back panel onto the center back, use a pin to ease in the mount fabric. It's the same as the lining, so it'll be really slippery if you use satin, and I'm using a satin with a slight stretch, even a charmeuse, which is very, very light. You don't have to use something that light. It makes it easier if it's slightly stiffer. Anyway, you just work your way around using that pin to hold the lining fabric in place so that it doesn't push or pull. And then as you get to the end part, you are on the home run, which is great because it won't push and pull if it's straight. Secure your stitching. And then I'm doing my ties as well, so down the tip, turn all the way along. This is really dead easy. And if you don't want to do a tie, just don't do a tie. Just leave it out. This is just something that I thought would be quite pretty. Cut back the corner, then you push it in with your fingers, a pencil or something like I'm here, and just push it through all the way, and then you can iron your tip. come my tip is so sharp. What you do is take a pin and you push in that little ugly nose that we usually get, like that. You can also hand stitch that, but you can just leave it, and then you just roll the edge of it and iron it. And now I'm going to attach the side pieces, and my ties are going to be slotted in there at the lower end. And I'm going to pin in my ties. Make sure the ties go in evenly. Also, I've changed them later and did a pleat in that because that flap bit I didn't really like. So do it now if you're working with these instructions. And now I'm going to sew in the front panel. Again, I'm using the pin, but this is really difficult when you come down to the round part of it. You have to do it stitch by stitch. Don't let it push. So my left hand holds it back. Lots of pressure applied actually. This is not easy. And then the right hand also holds it with a pin and make sure I ease everything in. And you can see it wants to pleat there, but don't let it. Move it under, ease it in. It takes a bit of practice, but once you get it right, it looks beautiful. Home run again. Phew. Secure stitches at the end. Front down. And now we also need to press it so it looks as beautiful as that. And what I've done is I'm pressing these apart. Normally I press the seam to the front, but this would have been a little bit thick with all the stuff in there and also with lame and whatnot. So I'm pressing it apart. Ironing cloth over it, kind of hangs over the edge of my ironing board. I don't know if you can see that. So now I'm coming from the other side as well. And the bigger the bust, the more likely you are to snip around that very curvy bust bit we've got here. That will need a snip, simply because Ivana, my model, has got a rather large chest, so in that case you have to do it. If you have a smaller chest, you probably don't even need to snip it at all. You can snip both sides as well, just make sure it's nice and flat. And then I put my ironing cloth over that again, hold it with my fingers. Don't burn yourself if you don't have asbestos fingers like mine. And at the last minute I move my fingers off and I'm getting a very beautiful result here. Now it's all in. Next step is back to normal. We can put the shoulder seams together, and we're also going to obviously do that with the lining. And we're also going to put the lining together in a minute. So sewn together, 1 centimeter seam allowance. By the way, it's always a centimeter seam allowance on all my patterns. We iron it from the inside and then we iron it from the outside. And now we're going to put the lining together, but I'm not pinning it because the pattern has got markings on it. So if you snip those, you can just put the snips on top of each other and sew it together. Now the front is a different matter to the back. The back is like swimming, you know, it's so easy. And then the front is different. You need to really ease in to the point where you have both markings. You can't push it over and pull it. You just ease in, and you can use the pin as well. But now I'm coming to the really round bit. Sorry, my fingers are in the way, but it's stitch by stitch. You always feed in your fabric straight into the presser foot. So just a few stitches and then move it around a bit, and then move it around a bit until you get there. And always line up those little notches because they're ever so helpful. And then home run again. Whee, done. That wasn't easy. Shoulders as well. And then ironing it apart. I've got to be careful here because it's all polyester, so I don't want it to melt. Iron the princess seam to the front or the center back. It's always the body middle you do. Iron it from the inside or underside and also from the outside to get a beautiful smooth finish. Now I'm going to put my sleeves in. So I've marked where the front is. I mean, you get away with getting this wrong on a lame like that, but yeah, it's better if you put it right. Make sure you start and end exactly where you've marked it from the pattern. And if you haven't marked it, you can see my pattern piece here next to me. I just took it and marked it, so I knew where it needed to go. And make sure before you start sewing it in that both sides are exactly the same, because I let you in on the secret here. I didn't. I finished it off and then realized one sleeve was like a 1.5 centimeters slower. Don't ask me how I did it, but I didn't check it, you know, thinking I'm so brilliant. And I had it all finished and I had to unpick it all, and that was dreadful. So sew the sleeve in, and then we can put the lining over the top. Now actually, when I was finished, I thought maybe we should just do the neckline, put the stay tape on it. I'd run out from my Joanne stay tape, so I used a little bit of my selvage, which also works, and then check that it was all okay and just right. And what I wanted to say here is, if you did the neckline first and then understitched the entire neckline and then ironed it and then put it all back and then did the armhole, it's probably better than what I'm doing here. And all the way around the neckline and a little bit around the armhole here, because it's up at the top, it's like really, well, it's like a big sausage and it's quite hard. So I thought, well, make it easy on myself, do just a little bit around the curve first and do the neckline, and then I do the other bit afterwards. And that did work, but of course I could have just done the entire neckline and then the armhole after. Anyway, make sure that you sew on your stay tape all the way along, and you can see here that I only remove the pins as I'm actually almost hitting them, and when I was an apprentice I used to hit them a lot. It's a bit of practice, but there's no point taking a pin out before you actually got to it, because then the pin is no good to you. It's holding something in place that's vital, so practice it. And yeah, get yourself some extra sewing needles because you will break a few. Secure your stitches, and then I'm going around the armhole as well, and because I've got all those layers I didn't actually use stay tape around the armhole, and also I thought, well, if that stretches a bit, maybe that's a nice thing if it's a bit tight on the underarm. And then finally I can put the seams on top of each other here, the shoulder seam, and I'm closing the rest of the armhole. You can see how sausagey that is. That's why I didn't want to do it in one go. And again, don't let the lining pull up. It looks like it wants to, especially when you're working with lots of fabrics and they've all got a different texture to them. But if you let it push and you put in little pleats, then you will have a twist in your shoulders, and that's not very nice, so you've got to get them in. Again, if you'd be making this with cotton and 2 layers, it's dead easy, and none of this is a problem. Now I'm going to cut this back all the way. Just quickly, if you wanted to make the cap sleeve in cotton, of course you would need it 4 times, so you've got a lining and an outer. And there is a short video just showing you how to do that cotton sleeve, because it's got a little bit of elastication in it as well, so it's slightly different. Then you want to really grab all that fabric and make sure there's absolutely no pins in there before you start pulling through the back, through that shoulder seam to the front. I'm using a safety pin actually, that always works really well. Grab that pin and pull it through. If you have any pins left in there, you can really damage the fabric. Now I'm going to understitch, and I'm going to do it on the underarm as far as I can go, and I'm also going to do it on the neckline. So that is why I thought, well, it would have been really nice to be able to go around the whole neckline, which you can't do at this stage. So that's up to you. Decide if you want to do the neckline first and then the armholes, so that you can have the entire neckline understitched. Really pull the fabric apart when you're doing it, so that you get a really good line there, and it's just a few millimeters over from the edge again, and that will keep the lining from rolling out. So that's important, and it has to be around there. Then I'm going to press this again, ironing cloth, make it look all beautiful. Lots of steam, lots of heat. And here I'm really rolling this out. Now this does take time, but once something is ironed really well, it's just beautiful. Ooh, look at that. I love it. So now sleeves are in, and I think this might be the moment where I realized. Anyway, onto the side seam. We're going to go all the way up, so grab the lining and then just pull the other two bits together. And we're walking over to our sewing machine and we're sewing this together, 1 centimeter seam allowance, all the way. I've put also a pin in there where the underarm seam needs to match. I don't want that not to match. All the way, lining up the edges. And then iron it. I also would recommend that this is where you do your fitting, because when I measured through, I found actually the dress was a little bit too big. It's probably because when you work with lamy and stuff, keeping the seam allowance, although I thought I had, I probably didn't entirely, so it came out a little bit bigger. And so I actually in the end made the dress a bit smaller along the side seam, and this is a perfect time to check that you've done everything right. The bust will fit lovely anyway, but that's something I would check. And then once it's pressed, and you can see here I put a pleat into the tie, which is much nicer. I can put the finishing touches on. I am so happy. This stage is so great. You want to fold up your ties now so that they don't get caught in anything when you put the skirt on, because this is really truly the home run now, isn't it? So I'm going to put my skirt onto the top, and unlike what I've done in other videos where I do the centre back first, I thought here I show you a way that you can put the zip in by leaving that open and get round getting that horrible, you know, that horrible little gnubble that you get at the end of the zip with this method. So anyway, mark the centre front, put the centre front of the skirt on, and make very sure that you pin it from the side of the bodice. Much easier to sew on, and also you can see the seams so you can make sure nothing falls over. And then you stitch that on again, 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way to the end. Make sure that nothing gets caught underneath it. And although with like a cotton, well, you just put it right, but if you have got really delicate lace or this lamy stuff I've got here, I didn't really want to make a mistake. Make absolutely sure and check it that you didn't catch anything before you go on to the next step. And that is ironing the seam upwards. Could of course iron it apart, but I don't have anything to cover it, so I didn't want to do that on this one. And if I did iron it apart, I would have also to snip it, and that would look quite ugly if it's then visible afterwards. So in this instance it went all up into the waistband. Then I snip the seam allowance so I can iron it apart for where the zip goes in. And now I'm going to show you how we're going to do the zip. I've got a foot here that I got from China or somewhere, and I can just say it didn't work. So get a foot, same as the ruffle foot, that is specific to your machine. I'm using a really nice concealed zip from Joann's from Coats Limited, so it doesn't break. The side where you can't see the teeth facing downwards onto my dress, and I pin it so I get about 1 centimeter seam allowance there, and then where the marking is on my pattern, to leave it open, that I put a pin there, and then I also pin this. Now the problem with doing it right with this method is that you need to line everything up. So I thought, well, this is what we do. We just mark it with one of these invisible textile markers which just disappear in the air. And then I can see where I need to put it on the other side. I also mark that low point on the dress, and I think that solves the problem of why I don't like that technique so much, and then it worked really well actually. So now I can put the other side on as well with the zip open, and because I've marked it, you can't really go wrong now. I can put that on to the lower bit and on the center bit where I've marked it, and beautiful. So at the top I know how much is standing over on the other side, so same amount there. And then the really weird thing with zips, and this is where people go wrong, when they put like the lower marking on here, it always looks like the fabric is too much. Like every time, you know, I don't know, it's like jinxed or something. But it isn't. You go by your marking, you know that has to fit on there, otherwise you get that horrible knubbel at the end again. And then I can sew this baby on. First I'm doing it on the side, and then another line which is close to the teeth all the way down. And in my machine here, I'm using just a normal zipper foot. I move it all the way over to the left and then 2 steps back, or even 3 steps, because I do not want any of the teeth to be sewn in too close so that the lamy will catch. And I'm testing that by doing it up now. Just have a look. Yep, that went up fine. Don't go too close, it will catch, and then the zip will also open up. I'm just leaving it like that, and to be honest, once I had pressed this looked absolutely beautiful. There was nothing wrong with it. And the lamy also caught a little bit, so I thought, well, that would be just the luck, isn't it? You do it up and you ruin your entire dress by getting it caught. So I'm using some hand stitches all the way down, coming out and going in the same point to secure this top layer to the lining and to the actual zip, and that way it can't go anywhere. And I'm doing that from about 3 or 4 centimeters down from the top and 3 or 4 centimeters up from the bottom, so that I can still do my seaming. Alternatively, you could do this at the very end. Strike while the iron is hot. I thought I'd do it now. And I'm going all the way down, and that is actually really, really good, because now you can see how firm that looks. Give it a good press again. And then when I did up the zip, it was much smoother than before. You can see here, it's a little bit gapey, but I am leaving it because with this stuff you don't want to overdo it. Now I'm going to pin from the top to the bottom, so I can start sewing from the lower end, and I'm going to sew this up, and I'm going to end up right next to my stitching line, so it's slightly off because you can't really completely hit it. That's not possible. And when you're sewing it, really pull your fabric, because it will like push and pull. And I'm sorry, I've got the camera on the wrong side, so you don't see what I'm doing. But I'm just ending just slightly over, just to the point where the zip is sewn in. And so this is what it looks like then. And just like that. There are actually quite a few good videos on this technique as well, so you can just check some out on the YouTube from my YouTube colleagues. And then we iron that seam apart, and beautiful. I mean, we're literally almost done. Give a good press from the outside. Absolutely love this stage. At the hem, I'm turning in the sides, so that's nice and neat. And it's also getting rid of the overlocking thread. If that's still standing up, you want it to be really tidy. And you can also see I did some hand stitching, the same as I did on the zip. I did it all the way around the bottom of the skirt, about 3 centimeters up, so that there would be no pushing and pulling out. And you secure that thread, and we're done. So now I move over the lining, and then I move the zip over. Shown this many times before. It's a really good method of getting this right. And then I'm just stitching across the top. Just like that. Dead easy. Then cut away with a rubbish scissor and turn it. And then you turn the other side as well. You might want to close the zip and check that it's the same level. And you also snip the lining release a bit of that tension so that you don't have a pull in there. And then final stages, people, we are just going to pin it in. And I just leave this for a minute now. And I'm pinning in my lining to the waistline now, and then all the way up the zip. And you want that to be snug, but not too snug so it pulls. So basically just right. And pin, pin, pin. And then where we have got this here at the end, I'm going to just snip it again so it goes back up. Turn in my lining. Pin it well. All the way up the zip. And then I'm going to slip stitch it once round all the way. You can see here I've already done it to the zip, so you want to leave a little gap there, don't get too close. And then just by tunneling through the fabric that I've got here in the lining and grabbing a little bit at the bottom, I am attaching it. There we go, see? I can never do this like on the table. I need to sit down for this and have some pressure on it, have it over my knee, so just a little bit to show you how I do it. And it's all in, looking absolutely beautiful. Last thing to do is to sort out my zip. You sew over it a few times because this is too long, cut it off, and then we're going to finish off the end by just attaching some satin to it from the underside, sewing it to, and then cutting it back so that I can basically bind it. If you're using cotton, well, use some ready-made binding for that. And then we're folding it in both sides and from the top, and then it's just hand stitched down. I didn't do the most fantastic job here because mine was so slippery, but if you use a ready-made binding, which I could have done for this, it doesn't have to be the silky stuff. And then I just hand stitch this again with a slip stitch all the way up. Here you can see all the hand stitching again, and that really just makes sure that nothing comes out, so that's really important. Just in case, do up your zip. Now at the time I actually didn't know whether this dress was going to fit my model. I just made it with the measurements, exactly with the pattern, no fitting. And so when it finally arrived her end, I was so happy to see that it fitted her like a glove. I've also done a video for a 50s dress, which was again sent out without a fitting and came out exactly like that. So this pattern really does work. And then we've got flamenco style, and that is in red dupion silk with boning. So you might want to switch on to that video as well so that you can learn something else. And more to come. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.